My sister attacked my daughter over a purse at a family reunion. Then they called us trash. So I set my years-long plan into motion. My name is Nina, and I'm a 30-year-old single mother to the most wonderful 5-year-old daughter, Tess. We've been on our own since her father, Sean, decided fatherhood wasn't for him when she was barely walking. It's been tough, but I've worked my way up from waiting tables to becoming a successful real estate agent. More importantly, I've been quietly building something that would eventually become my family's worst nightmare. My family has always treated me like the black sheep. My sister Elena, 3 years older, was always the golden child. She married her college sweetheart, Wesley, right after graduation, had 2 kids, Brandon, 7, and Sophia, 6, and moved into a McMansion in the suburbs. My mother, Veronica, never missed an opportunity to compare us, always pointing out how Elena had made something of herself while I was struggling as a single mother. What they didn't know was that I hadn't been struggling for quite some time. The reunion was held at my uncle's lake house, the same place we gathered every summer since I was a kid. I almost didn't go, but Tess had been excited about seeing her cousins, and I figured it was time to show my face again. I've been avoiding these gatherings for the past 2 years, claiming work commitments, but the truth was, I couldn't stand the constant judgment and snide remarks. Tess looked adorable that day in her new pink sundress. Nothing fancy, just something I'd picked up at Target, but she felt like a princess in it. I'd also bought her a small designer purse, a Coach bag I'd found at an outlet store. It was a little extravagant, but she'd been so good lately, and I wanted to spoil her a bit. The trouble started almost immediately. Elena's daughter, Sophia, spotted Tess's purse and decided she wanted it now. I should mention that Sophia is used to getting everything she wants. Elena and Wesley spoil her rotten, buying her every toy, every outfit, every gadget she so much as glances at. Tess, on the other hand, has learned to appreciate what she has. "I want that purse," Sophia announced, reaching for Tess's bag. "No, it's mine," Tess said, politely holding it closer to her chest. "Mommy bought it for me." "But I want it more," Sophia whined, her voice getting louder. "Mommy, Tess won't share." Brandon, never wanting to miss an opportunity to stir up trouble, chimed in. "Yeah, she's being mean. She should share with family." I was across the yard, helping my aunt set up the food table, but I could see the situation escalating. Tess was clutching her purse, tears forming in her eyes as both Brandon and Sophia tried to grab it from her. "It's not fair," Sophia screamed. "I never get anything pretty like that." The irony wasn't lost on me. Sophia was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, with matching shoes and a hair bow that looked like it came from some boutique children's store. But apparently she needed Tess's one nice thing too. That's when Elena heard the commotion. I watched in horror as my sister stormed over to the group of children, her face twisted with anger. Without even asking what was happening, she grabbed Tess's arm and twisted it painfully. "Give it to her right now, you selfish little brat," Elena screamed at my 5-year-old daughter. Tess started crying immediately, not just from the pain but from the shock of being treated so harshly by someone she barely knew but had been taught to respect as family. The sight of my baby girl in pain sent me into protective mother mode instantly. I dropped what I was doing and rushed over, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and rage. "Leave her alone right now, or it will end very badly," I said, my voice deadly calm despite the storm brewing inside me. Elena's grip on Tess's arm tightened. "Your brat needs to learn some manners. Sophia wants this purse, and Tess should give it to her. Let go of my daughter now." I reached for Tess, trying to gently extract her from Elena's grasp. That's when my mother decided to join the fray. Veronica came rushing over, and without even asking what was happening, she slapped me hard across the face. The sound echoed across the yard, and suddenly everyone was staring. "Take your ungrateful brat and get lost. We don't want trash like you here," my mother shrieked, her face red with anger. The slap stung, but not as much as the words. Not as much as watching my daughter cling to me, confused and scared, while her own family called her a brat and treated her like she was somehow less deserving than her cousin. I could have screamed, I could have slapped my mother right back. I could have grabbed Tess and stormed out, just like they expected me to do, just like I'd done so many times before when they pushed me too far. Instead, I stayed completely silent. I gently took Tess's hand and walked her over to a quiet corner of the yard, away from the shocked faces and whispered conversations that had started up around us. I knelt down and wiped her tears, checking her arm where Elena had grabbed her. There would definitely be bruises. "Mommy, why was Elena so mean to me?" Tess asked, her voice small and confused. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly, "but it's not okay and it's never going to happen again." Then I pulled out my phone and made one call. "Hi, this is Nina Mitchell. I need to speak with Elias Ford, please. Tell him it's urgent." I watched as my family continued their reunion, most of them shooting glances in my direction but none of them bothering to check on Tess or apologize for what had just happened. My mother was holding court near the food table, probably spinning the story to make me look like the villain. Elena was comforting Sophia, who was still crying about not getting the purse she wanted. Within 10 minutes my phone rang. "Nina, what's the emergency?" Elias's voice was concerned but professional. Elias Ford had been my lawyer for the past 3 years, ever since I'd started my real estate business and needed legal guidance. But more recently, he'd been helping me with something much more personal and potentially devastating to my family. "I need you to proceed with everything we discussed. All of it. Today." There was a pause. "Are you sure? Once we start this process, there's no going back." I looked across the yard at my mother, who was now laughing with Elena like nothing had happened, at my sister, who was letting Sophia play with some other child's toy that she'd apparently commandeered, at the family that had just physically hurt my daughter and called us both trash. "I'm absolutely sure. I'll make the calls right now. You should start seeing results within the hour." I hung up and sat with Tess on a bench overlooking the lake. She was playing with her purse, having quickly forgotten the drama in the way that resilient children do. But I hadn't forgotten. I would never forget the look of pain and confusion on her face when Elena grabbed her. You see, what my family didn't know was that I'd been planning for this moment for years. Growing up in this family had been like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Every family gathering, every holiday, every birthday party was an opportunity for my mother and sister to remind me of my failures and shortcomings. When I got pregnant at 24 with Tess, unmarried and working as a waitress, they acted like I'd committed the ultimate sin against the family name. "How could you be so irresponsible?" My mother had screamed when I told her about the pregnancy. "What will people think? What will your sister's friends say when they find out her sister is having a bastard child?" Elena had been equally charming. "Great, so now we have to pretend we're supportive of your terrible life choices. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for Wesley and me? We're trying to build a respectable reputation in this community." When Tess's father, Sean, decided to bail before she was even born, they treated it like vindication of their predictions. "We told you this would happen," my mother said with barely concealed satisfaction. "Men don't want to be tied down to women who make poor decisions." But what they didn't understand was that their cruelty had made me stronger, not weaker. Every cutting remark, every dismissive comment, every time they excluded Tess and me from family events because we were an embarrassment, I filed it away. I remembered every slight, every moment they made my daughter feel unwanted, every time they treated us like we were somehow less than human. The worst incident had happened 18 months before the reunion. It was Brandon's 6th birthday party, and Elena had specifically told me not to bring a gift because we don't want Tess to feel bad when she can't afford something nice. I should have known it was a trap. When we arrived empty-handed as instructed, Elena made a huge show of pointing out to everyone that Nina didn't even bother to bring Brandon a present. I guess some people just don't understand family obligations. Tess had been so confused and hurt. She was only 3 then, but she understood enough to know that something was wrong, that we were being treated differently. She asked me later why Aunt Elena was so mean to us, and I had to make up some story about Aunt Elena having a bad day. That night, I started documenting everything. Every cruel comment, every deliberate exclusion, every time they went out of their way to make Tess feel unwanted. I kept a journal of their behavior, noting dates, witnesses, and exactly what was said or done. I told myself it was just therapeutic writing, a way to process my feelings. But deep down, I think I knew I was building a case. The turning point came when Tess started asking why Grandma Veronica didn't love her like she loved Brandon and Sophia. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that some people are just cruel? How do you tell your baby that her own grandmother sees her as a disappointment and an embarrassment? That's when I decided that documentation wasn't enough. I needed to protect Tess from these people, but I also needed to make sure they couldn't hurt other children the way they hurt her. Elena's parenting style was already showing signs of the same toxicity I'd grown up with. I'd watched her scream at Brandon for normal kid behavior, calling him stupid and worthless when he spilled something or made a mistake. I started researching my legal options, what constituted emotional abuse, what evidence would I need to protect Tess, how could I ensure that my family's pattern of cruelty stopped with my generation. That's when I reconnected with Elias Ford. We'd gone to high school together, and he'd become a successful attorney specializing in family law and estate planning. When I reached out to him about getting a will made, single mothers need a plan for the worst, he was shocked to hear about my family situation. "Nina, what you're describing isn't normal family dysfunction," he told me during our first consultation. "This is systematic emotional abuse, and it's affecting your daughter's development and self-esteem. You have options." Elias helped me understand that I didn't have to accept my family's treatment, that Tess didn't have to grow up feeling unwanted and unloved by her extended family, that there were legal remedies for the kind of systematic emotional abuse we'd been enduring. But more importantly, he helped me see that I had more power than I realized. It started 3 years ago when my grandmother, my mother's mother, passed away. Grandma Maeve had always been my favorite family member, the only one who never made me feel like a disappointment. She was a sharp woman who had built a successful business from nothing and had very little patience for the kind of entitlement and cruelty I'd grown up seeing from my mother and sister. I'll never forget the last conversation I had with Grandma Maeve before she died. She was in the hospital, weak but still sharp as a tack, and she asked me to come alone, without Tess. "Nina," she said, gripping my hand with surprising strength, "I need you to know something. I've been watching how Veronica and Elena treat you and that beautiful little girl of yours, and it makes me sick." I was shocked. I'd tried so hard to hide the family dynamics from her, not wanting to burden her with our problems in her final days. "Grandma, you don't need to worry about—" "Hush," she interrupted. "I've been around for 89 years, and I know cruelty when I see it. Your mother has always been jealous and spiteful, but I hoped she'd grow out of it. Instead, she's gotten worse, and now she's teaching Elena to be the same way." She paused, struggling for breath, then continued. "I've changed my will, Nina. I'm leaving everything to you, not because I don't love the rest of the family, but because you're the only one who understands the value of kindness and hard work. You're the only one who will use what I've built to help others instead of just feeding your own ego." I started to protest, but she held up a weak hand. "Veronica expects to inherit everything because she's the oldest. Elena expects to get a substantial inheritance to pay for that ridiculous house and lifestyle they can't afford. But neither of them has ever worked a day in their lives. Neither of them has ever struggled or sacrificed or had to build something from nothing." She squeezed my hand again. "You have, Nina. You've built a good life for yourself and Tess despite having no help from anyone. You've stayed kind and generous despite being treated horribly by people who should love and support you. That's the kind of person who deserves to carry on my legacy." I was crying by then, overwhelmed by her faith in me and her awareness of what I'd been going through. "There's something else," she continued. "I've been watching Veronica manage some of my financial affairs these past few years, and I don't like what I see. Small amounts going missing, questionable expenses, payments to herself that weren't authorized. I've been documenting it all." She reached into her bedside table and pulled out a thick folder. "This is all the evidence you'll need when the time comes. I've hired a private investigator to verify everything. Your mother is stealing from me, Nina, and she thinks I'm too old and confused to notice. My grandmother died 3 days later, and at the reading of her will, the family explosion was even worse than I'd expected. My mother literally screamed at the lawyer, accusing him of falsifying documents. Elena threw a tantrum that would have been embarrassing in a 5-year-old, let alone a grown woman. "This is ridiculous," my mother shrieked. "Nina doesn't deserve this. She's an unmarried mother with no education and no prospects. I'm the oldest daughter. Everything should come to me." "She probably seduced some old man to get him to change the will," Elena added venomously. "There's no way Mom would leave everything to her. Nina's never accomplished anything in her life." The lawyer, an elderly gentleman who had known my grandmother for decades, remained professional but firm. The will is entirely legal and was executed with full witnesses. Mrs. Maeve was of sound mind and made her wishes very clear. But there was a catch, as my grandmother had warned me there would be. The will specified that I wouldn't gain full control of the inheritance until I turned 35, still 3 years away at the time. In the meantime, the estate would be managed by a trust, with my mother serving as one of the trustees along with the family lawyer. At least Veronica will be able to keep Nina from squandering everything before she's mature enough to handle this responsibility, one of my aunts had murmured, trying to smooth over the family drama. What none of them knew was that my grandmother had anticipated this arrangement might be problematic. She'd left me specific instructions about monitoring the trust, along with contact information for the private investigator she'd hired and detailed records of my mother's previous financial improprieties. If Veronica continues her pattern of theft, you'll have grounds to have her removed as trustee and take early control of your inheritance, Grandma Maeve had written in a private letter left for me with her lawyer. But you'll need to be patient and build an airtight case. Document everything. So that's exactly what I did. For 3 years, I quietly monitored every transaction, every expense, every decision made by the trust. Elias helped me understand what to look for and how to build a legal case that would stand up in court. My mother thought she was being clever, taking small amounts that she figured wouldn't be noticed, a few hundred here for administrative costs, 1,000 there for property maintenance, larger amounts for consulting fees that couldn't be verified. Over 3 years, the thefts added up to nearly $150,000. She was funding her lifestyle with my inheritance, buying new furniture, taking expensive vacations, even making payments on Elena's credit cards, all of it disguised as legitimate trust expenses, all of it carefully documented by Elias and me. Meanwhile, I was building my own life and career. The inheritance income that was legitimately mine allowed me to go back to school and get my real estate license. Within 2 years, I was making more money than I'd ever dreamed possible. I bought a small house for Tess and me, started building a college fund for her, and began planning for the day when I could take full control of my grandmother's legacy. But more importantly, I was learning to value myself and to teach Tess to value herself. We started going to therapy together, working through the damage that years of family cruelty had inflicted on both of us. Tess learned that she was worthy of love and respect, and I learned that I didn't have to accept unacceptable behavior just because it came from family members. The therapist, Dr. Naomi Fields, helped me understand that my family's treatment of Tess and me wasn't just mean-spirited, it was a form of systematic abuse designed to keep us feeling powerless and dependent. They need you to believe you're worthless, she explained, because if you knew your true value, you wouldn't tolerate their behavior. Those therapy sessions gave me the strength to start setting boundaries. I stopped attending every family gathering where Tess and I were treated poorly. I stopped accepting my mother's loans that came with strings attached and guilt trips. I stopped trying to earn their approval and started focusing on building a life that made Tess and me happy. The more independent I became, the angrier my family got. They were losing their favorite punching bag, and they didn't like it. The phone calls became more frequent and more vicious. My mother would call, crying about how I was destroying the family by not coming to every gathering. Elena would leave voicemails accusing me of thinking I'm better than everyone else because I'd stopped tolerating their abuse. "You used to be so sweet and agreeable," my mother complained during one particularly nasty phone call. "Now you're cold and selfish. What happened to the daughter I raised?" What happened was that I finally learned I deserved better. What happened was that I realized my job as a mother was to protect Tess from the same treatment I'd endured. What happened was that I stopped being afraid of their disapproval and started being afraid of passing their toxicity on to my daughter. The final straw came 10 months before the reunion, at Brandon's 7th birthday party. Elena had forgotten to invite Tess and me, claiming it was just an oversight. When we showed up anyway, my aunt had told us about it. Elena made a scene about not having enough food or party favors for unexpected guests. "I guess some people don't understand that parties require planning," she announced loudly to the other parents. "When you don't please reply, it puts the host in a difficult position." Tess, now 4.5, was old enough to understand that we weren't wanted. She clung to my leg, confused and hurt, while Brandon and Sophia played with their cousins and friends. No one offered to include her in the games, No one made sure she got a piece of cake. She spent the entire party sitting beside me, watching other children have fun while being systematically excluded. That night, she asked me why Brandon and Sophia's friends were mean to her. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that adults had poisoned their children against her? How do you tell your baby that some people will hate her for no reason other than the circumstances of her birth? That's when I decided the documentation phase was over. It was time for action. I called Elias the next morning and told him I was ready to proceed with removing my mother as trustee. I wanted to take early control of my inheritance, and I wanted to explore legal action against Elena and Wesley for the shoddy construction work they'd done on one of the hotel properties. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Elias asked. "Once we start this process, there's no going back. Your family relationships will be permanently damaged." I looked at Tess, who was playing quietly with her dolls, and thought about her confused little face at the birthday party. I thought about all the future family gatherings where she'd be made to feel unwanted and unloved. I thought about the therapy sessions, where she'd have to unlearn the messages of worthlessness that my family was already starting to plant in her young mind. "Elias," I said, "those relationships are already damaged beyond repair. The only question is whether I'm going to protect my daughter from further harm, or continue to expose her to people who see her as less than human." We spent the next 10 months building our case. The embezzlement evidence was overwhelming. My mother had been sloppy in her efforts to cover her tracks. The construction fraud case was equally solid. Wesley's company had cut corners on safety and materials, causing significant damage to one of the hotel properties. But the most important preparation was emotional. Dr. Fields helped me and Tess prepare for the inevitable family explosion when the truth came out. We role-played different scenarios, talked about how to handle anger and threats, and practiced staying calm in the face of manipulation and guilt trips. "Remember," Dr. Fields told me, "their anger is not your responsibility. Their consequences are not your fault. You are protecting your child, and that is always the right choice." The family reunion was supposed to be my opportunity to test the waters, to see if there was any possibility of reconciliation before I pulled the trigger on the legal action. I'd hoped that maybe, just maybe, seeing Tess as a sweet, innocent 5-year-old would soften their hearts enough for us to find some middle ground. Instead, they proved that they were exactly as cruel and selfish as I'd always known them to be. Elena physically hurting my daughter and my mother calling her a brat eliminated any lingering doubts I had about proceeding with my plans. At the reading of her will, everyone was shocked to learn that she'd left everything to me: the family house, worth about $600,000, her investment portfolio, worth another $900,000, and most importantly her business, a small but profitable chain of boutique hotels that she'd built over 40 years. My mother had been furious, of course. She'd expected to inherit everything as the eldest child. Elena had been equally outraged, having already spent money she didn't have based on the assumption that she'd be getting a substantial inheritance. But Grandma Maeve had been very clear in her will. She'd left everything to me because, as she put it, "Nina is the only one in this family who understands the value of hard work and treating people with kindness." However, there was a catch. The will specified that I wouldn't gain full control of the inheritance until I turned 33, still 3 years away. In the meantime, the estate was being managed by a trust, with the income being held for me. My mother had been appointed as a trustee along with a family lawyer, and she'd been receiving a modest trustee fee for her services. What my mother didn't know was that I'd been quietly building a case to have her removed as trustee. You see, in her fury over not inheriting anything herself, my mother had been siphoning money from the trust. Not huge amounts, she was too smart for that, but small, regular withdrawals that she classified as administrative expenses or property maintenance. Over 3 years, she'd stolen nearly $75,000. She thought she was being clever, but she'd underestimated me. I'd been carefully documenting every irregular withdrawal, every questionable expense, every time she used trust money for her own purposes. Elias had been helping me build an airtight case for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The plan had been to wait until closer to my 35th birthday to make my move, but watching my sister hurt my daughter and my mother call us trash had accelerated my timeline considerably. About an hour after my phone call, I watched my mother's face go pale as her phone rang. She answered it hesitantly, and I could see her expression change from confusion to panic as whoever was on the other end spoke. She hung up and immediately called someone else, probably her own lawyer if I had to guess. The district attorney's office had just informed her that she was under investigation for embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. 20 minutes later, Elena's phone rang, then Wesley's, then my uncle's. The party atmosphere was definitely shifting. People were starting to whisper more, and several family members kept glancing over at me and Tess with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. My phone buzzed with a text from Elias: embezzlement evidence submitted to district attorney. Construction lawsuit filed in civil court. Trustee removal petition submitted to probate court. This will take several months to process through the system, but everything is officially in motion. I felt a grim satisfaction wash over me. The legal wheels were turning, and there would be no stopping them now. You see, Wesley worked in commercial construction, and his company had been hired 18 months ago to do some renovation work on one of my grandmother's hotels. The work had been shoddy, corners cut, cheaper materials used than specified, safety protocols ignored. When the problems became apparent, Wesley's company had refused to fix them properly, claiming the issues were normal settling and not their responsibility. The hotel had to be closed for 2 months for proper repairs, costing the trust nearly $120,000 in lost revenue and additional repair costs. Elias had been building a case against Wesley's company for breach of contract, fraud, and negligent construction practices. Elena, as Wesley's business partner who handled their company's finances and project management, was equally liable. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost missed my mother storming across the yard toward me. "What did you do?" she hissed, her face red with anger and panic. I looked up at her calmly. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play dumb with me, Nina. The district attorney's office just called, and they're investigating me for embezzlement. What lies have you been telling people?" "No lies, Mom, just facts." Her hand twitched like she wanted to slap me again, but there were too many witnesses this time. "You vindictive little, after everything we've done for you? What exactly have you done for me?" I asked, my voice still calm. "Besides steal from my inheritance and let Elena physically hurt my daughter? We didn't steal anything. That money was for legitimate expenses. Was your vacation to Hawaii a legitimate trust expense? How about the new car you bought last month, or the credit card bills you'd been paying with trust money?" Her face went completely white. She knew I had her. Elena appeared at her side looking equally panicked. "Nina, what's going on? Our lawyer just called about a lawsuit over the hotel renovation. This is insane." "Actually, it's justice," I said, standing up and taking Tess's hand. "Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences for your actions?" "What actions?" Elena demanded. "We did the work on that hotel exactly as contracted. You used substandard materials, ignored safety codes, and when the problems became apparent, you refused to fix them. The hotel had to be closed for 2 months because of your company's negligence. That cost the trust nearly $120,000. That's ridiculous. Those problems weren't our fault." "Then you'll have no problem explaining that to a judge." By now, the entire family reunion had stopped pretending not to listen. Everyone was watching our confrontation with fascination and horror. My mother grabbed my arm, much like Elena had grabbed Tess's earlier. "You need to call this off right now. We're a family." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't physically hurt children. Family doesn't call a 5-year-old girl a brat and try to force her to give up her belongings. That was just a misunderstanding. No, Mom. That was assault on a child, my child. I gently removed her hand from my arm and picked up Tess. "We're leaving now. You'll be hearing from the district attorney about the criminal investigation for embezzlement. Elena and Wesley will be hearing from my lawyer about the civil lawsuit, and all of you will be hearing from Child Protective Services about what happened here today." The mention of CPS made several family members gasp. Elena looked like she might faint. "You wouldn't dare call CPS on your own family," my mother whispered. "I already did. They take reports of child abuse very seriously, especially when there are witnesses." I looked around at the crowd of family members. Funny thing about family reunions, lots of people see everything. And it was true. While most of my family had stood by and watched Elena hurt Tess and my mother slap me, several of them had been appalled by what they witnessed. My cousin Sloane had already approached me quietly to say she'd be happy to give a statement to authorities about what she'd seen. My uncle's wife had taken photos of the bruises forming on Tess's arm. Not everyone in my family was terrible. Some of them were just too intimidated by my mother to speak up. But when push came to shove, they knew right from wrong. "Nina, please," Elena said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Can't we work this out?" "I'm sorry about what happened with Tess. I was just trying to teach her to share. By physically hurting her and calling her a brat? That's your idea of teaching?" I lost my temper. "It won't happen again." "You're right, it won't, because you'll never have the opportunity again." I started walking toward my car, Tess secure in my arms. Behind me, I could hear my mother and Elena arguing with each other, their voices getting higher and more panicked. "This is all your fault," my mother was saying to Elena. "If you hadn't grabbed that child..." "My fault? You're the one who slapped her, and you're the one who's been stealing money." I smiled grimly as I buckled Tess into her car seat. They were already turning on each other, just like I'd expected they would. As I drove away from the lake house, Tess asked, "Mommy, are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. The people who hurt you are in trouble." "Good," she said firmly. "They were mean." The next 18 months were a whirlwind of legal activity. My mother was eventually arrested and charged with embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty after a thorough investigation by the district attorney's office. The amounts she'd stolen were substantial enough to constitute felony charges. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Elias advised me that we had such a strong case there was no reason to accept anything less than full restitution and jail time. Elena and Wesley's construction company was served with a lawsuit for breach of contract, fraud, and negligent construction. Their insurance company initially tried to deny the claim, but when faced with the overwhelming evidence Elias had compiled, they settled out of court for $240,000, double what the trust had lost due to their shoddy work. The CPS investigation was thorough and professional. They interviewed Tess, me, and several witnesses from the family reunion. While they didn't remove Brandon and Sophia from Elena's home, they did require the family to attend counseling sessions and put them on a monitoring list for potential future issues. But the most satisfying part came 15 months later. My mother's theft had been substantial enough that the court granted my petition to remove her as trustee and appointed me to oversee my grandmother's estate. At 30, I was now in full control of my inheritance, 3 years earlier than originally planned. The first thing I did was cut off the modest trustee fee my mother had been receiving. The second thing I did was fire Wesley's company from any future work on the hotel properties. The third thing I did was use part of my inheritance to start a college fund for Tess that would ensure she never had to depend on anyone else's kindness or charity. My mother ended up pleading guilty to avoid a trial. She received 18 months in prison, with a possibility of early release for good behavior. Elena and Wesley's construction company went bankrupt trying to pay the settlement and legal fees. They had to sell their maxi mansion and move into a modest rental house across town. The family has basically split into 2 camps now. There are those who think I went too far, that I should have handled things within the family instead of involving lawyers and law enforcement. These people still invite my mother and Elena to family gatherings and treat them like the victims in this situation. Then there are those who have reached out to me privately to say they're proud of me for standing up for myself and Tess. These family members have apologized for not speaking up at the reunion and have made genuine efforts to build relationships with us. I don't attend family reunions anymore. I don't need the stress. And I don't want Tess exposed to people who think it's acceptable to physically hurt children or steal from them. Instead, we have our own small gatherings with family members who have proven themselves to be trustworthy and kind. Tess is thriving. She's in an excellent private school now thanks to my newfound financial stability. She takes dance classes and piano lessons, and she's never once asked me why we don't see Auntie Elena or Grandma Veronica anymore. Children are remarkably adaptable, and she's moved on from that traumatic day much better than I have. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted, If maybe I should have tried to work things out privately before involving lawyers and law enforcement. Then I remember the look of pain and confusion on Tess's face when Elena grabbed her arm, and I remember my mother's hand striking my cheek while she called my daughter trash. No, I didn't overreact. I finally reacted appropriately to years of abuse and mistreatment. The most important thing I learned from this whole experience is that being family doesn't give someone the right to hurt you or your child. Blood relations don't excuse theft, abuse, or cruelty. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself and your child is to cut toxic people out of your life, even if they happen to share your DNA. My grandmother would be proud of me, I think. She always said that the most important thing in life was protecting the people you love and standing up for yourself when others try to tear you down. She taught me that kindness is important, but it should never come at the expense of your own dignity or safety. Tess still has that Coach purse, by the way. She carries it to special occasions and tells people that it's the purse that taught her mommy to be brave. I'm not sure she fully understands what happened that day, but she knows that I fought for her when she needed me to. And that's all that really matters. These days, we're building our own traditions and our own chosen family. Tess has aunts and uncles who aren't related to us by blood but who love her unconditionally and would never dream of hurting her. She has grandparents who spoil her appropriately and teach her valuable life lessons without tearing down her self-esteem. Most importantly, she's growing up knowing that she deserves to be treated with respect and kindness, and that there are consequences when people choose to behave otherwise. The phone call I made that day at the family reunion didn't just protect Tess from future abuse, it taught her that she's worth protecting, that when someone hurts her there will be consequences, that her mother will always fight for her no matter what the cost. That's the kind of family legacy I want to leave her. Not money or property or business holdings, but the knowledge that she is valuable and loved and worthy of respect. And if anyone ever tries to tell her otherwise, well, they'll find out just how fearsome a mother's love can be. The last I heard, my mother was adjusting to prison life as well as could be expected. Elena and Wesley were struggling financially but slowly rebuilding their lives. Sophia and Brandon were doing well in counseling and learning better ways to handle disappointment and conflict. I don't wish them ill. I hope they've learned from this experience and become better people because of it, but I also don't feel any obligation to make their lives easier, or to pretend that what they did was acceptable. Tess and I are building a beautiful life together, surrounded by people who genuinely care about us and treat us with the respect we deserve. We're happy, we're healthy, and we're free from the toxic dynamics that plagued my childhood. That one phone call changed everything. It ended years of accepting unacceptable behavior and started a new chapter of our lives where Tess will grow up knowing her worth and never accepting less than she deserves. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept the unacceptable. Sometimes, protecting your child means making the hard choices that others will judge you for. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't elaborate or dramatic. It's simply living well and raising your child to know their value. That family reunion was the last time anyone will ever lay a hand on my daughter in anger. It was the last time anyone will call her names or try to take what belongs to her. It was the last time I'll stand by and let family members treat us like we're somehow less deserving of respect and kindness. One phone call, that's all it took to change everything. And I'd make it again in a heartbeat.